This is TWIS. This Week in Science, episode number 156, recorded Wednesday, April 29th, 2026. What is science worried about? Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Kiki, and tonight on the show, we will fill your head with fluoride, coffee jolts, and a reason to yawn. But first, thanks to our amazing Patreon sponsors for their generous support of TWIS. You can become a part of the Patreon community at patreon.com/thisweekinscience. Disclaimer, disclaimer, disclaimer. We know that we need to be nice if we want to have this conversation, but sometimes we just feel so frustrated at what appears to be a choice on your part to ignore valuable evidence in favor of a story you heard from Aunt Mabel. Now, Aunt Mabel did have an experience, and wow, did it change her mind. But Mabel is just one person, when the tens of thousands of people in clinical trials are mighty. But we know you don't know them. You only know who you know. We only wish you would trust us when we tell you what we know. So we'll take a step back. We'll take a breath. We aren't here to change your mind with just one conversation this week. But maybe you'll enjoy the banter. Maybe you'll find some fun. And maybe you'll come back every week to join people who want to talk with you here on This Week in Science. Coming up next.
I've got the kind of mind that can't get enough. I want to learn everything. I want to fill it all up with new discoveries that happen every day of the week. There's only one place to go to find the knowledge I seek. I want to know what's happening. What's happening? What's happening this week in science? What's happening? What's happening? What's happening this week in science?
Good science, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This Week in Science. I am back. It's Kiki. I'm back this week on my own to talk with you about all the science that I think is going to just fill your head with the best fun stuff and maybe a few other things that are thought-provoking as well. I have a whole bunch of stories ahead, and we'll try to work through them with everyone who is here live in the chat. I'm going to hopefully have some commentary coming from the people watching live, and we'll have a great show together. On this week's show, I have stories about dismantling American science. I have fluoride and your IQ, electroshocking coffee, and a reason or two for you to yawn. And I was going to ask Blair what's in the animal corner, but I'm not, because unfortunately she is still sick and she is coughing and aching. And I said, please, just 1 hour, Blair. And she said, I am already in bed, Kiki. So she says, have a great show. So let's do that for her. Let's have a great show for Blair. Thank you all for being here tonight. All right. So Blair was going to talk about crabs and grouse, but oh yeah, maybe I'll actually talk about the sexist city birds tonight as well. Going to bring that story in. I won't tell Blair's stories. She can bring them next week. All right, so I'm not going to ask her what's in the animal corner, but I have city birds and some bees for you for the animal corner. So we'll get into those things in just a little bit. But in the meantime, as we get started, I do want to remind you that This Week in Science, we stream live every Wednesday evening at about 8 p.m. Pacific time. And we have a lot of fun while we do it. You can find us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. And then you can subscribe to those channels, hit the notification buttons when we go live. And if we are live when you can watch live. Otherwise, you'll be able to see the shows recorded as they're up on those platforms. Additionally, that live show gets edited into a podcast. by our wonderful Rachel, who's an editor for our podcast and other podcasts. And then it's a podcast. All places that podcasts are found. How many times can I say podcast in a sentence? Probably too many if I really tried. If you would like to subscribe, find This Week in Science on your favorite podcast directory today. And share it with a friend, please, because sharing is caring. And we all know the joy of science. And that would be sharing joy germs, which is the best thing ever. Yes, I'm going to bring joy germs back for those of you who remember me from about 2011 and the internet. Okay. All right, moving forward. Is it time for the science? I do believe it is. Okay. All right. I almost forgot you can find information about the show at TWIS.org. Now it's time for the science. Okay, so the top story this week is one that I am very sad about, and I was really upset about it on Saturday when the news came out. I found out on Blue Sky that the Trump administration, that Trump had sent an email to the 22 members of the U.S. National Science Board, which if you go, hey, what's the National Science Board? Well, the Science Board is the board of expert individuals from across science and industry who manage the NSF and its budget. The NSB, that's the National Science Board, they talk to Congress and they say, hey, Congress, you should maybe give this much money to these upcoming projects. These are the things that are coming down the pipe. They talk with the Congress members and the individuals on the National Science Policy and Technology Committee. They talk to them about the needs of the NSF for the coming year and coming future years. They talk about all the things that different projects in the NSF have done. They talk about successes. They talk about challenges. They talk about wins. They manage those budgets. They give the departments their money. They are the conduit between Congress and the NSF for all the money that Congress appropriates to NSF, which we know that Trump has been attempting to mess with in certain ways. And so over the course of 2025, there were some 17 committees, I believe, that were canceled in the NSF or across the Health and Human Services and NSF and NIH. There were many committees, over 1,000 individuals who were let go from committees that they had been acting on, advising the scientific practices for the research and development industry of our government. And without somebody to sit between Congress and the NSF, we now don't have anybody who is nonpartisan or apolitical or a body of such people to work together in that manner to actually be able to make sure that the budget, the money that is coming from Congress is being given to the different departments and labs that it needs to be and projects that it needs to be given to. So we don't know the plan for the NSB at this point. We don't know if they are going to reconstitute the NSB with new appointees. We do not know anything about what is going to come from this situation. We just know that in a very short period of time, Congress is supposed to be voting on the 2027 budget for NSF. And now all the people who would be advising Congress on what the NSF needs are no longer in that position anymore. Additionally, the NSB is made up of individuals who hold 6-year terms in which 1/3 of the individuals are turned over every 2 years. So there's always an overlap in the individuals who have been appointed to the board and who is working on the board. So the National Science Board is in effect, even though any individual could be acting in a partisan manner or a biased manner, they'll be banished. No, they were banished. They will be balanced by all of the other people who are on the board and the time periods that they're on the board. So the design, the structure of the NSB was meant to be completely nonpartisan so that you couldn't have any administration playing politics with the money and how it's spent and how it's managed within the National Science Foundation. So anyway, we're in a great place of unknowing at the moment. We don't know where things are going to go, um, and we don't really know what this means for for how the budget coming from Congress, even for this year, is going to continue to be managed. So far, very little of the funding that has been promised to the NSF has actually been shelled out. So even though there was a lot of money given to grants and to different departments, not all that money has actually been spent. And this is a problem. Additionally, Trump wants to reduce the amount of money that is given to the NSF across the health and human services sector and all sorts of places, but really the NSF, um, but basically to zero. He doesn't want any money given to it. So our hope is with Congress, and that Congress and the legal system can continue to push against these continued this continued leveraging of loopholes that appears to be the modus operandi of how business is getting done these days. The amount of damage that has been happening as the U.S. scientific infrastructure is being dismantled it's huge, and I hate talking about it. So, but I believe we all need to talk about it. This is really important because if we don't have the government funding certain research initiatives, especially basic research, we're not going to be competitive. We're not going to have the basic foundation for future innovation within our country. So there needs to be somebody somewhere who has nonpartisan, like just not, I don't care, just give money to new ideas. Let's discover things. Let's make new discoveries that could lead to the next Velcro or spam or I don't know, the next cell phone, or there's so much that needs to be done. And without long term funding of these efforts, it's just where will new discoveries come from? How will we get to be able to have companies have new ideas if nobody's paying for things that don't profit immediately? This is why we need government funding to move forward. Not everything can be philanthropies and businesses. I am sorry. I don't know. We'll see where it goes. Someone else will do it, right? It's always somebody else's job. Oh, thanks, Renaissance woman. Thanks for jumping in. That would be Sarah Kobilka from last week who joined us for an interview. Thank you for jumping in, and definitely have a good crash out and don't have a science hangover tomorrow. I mean, I think that's important. Paul Disney is saying Congress, or Lon Koenig says direct congressional action is how NASA got any funding last round. And I think this is where it's going to have to sit. And we know for a fact that congressional science funding is bipartisan because funding science benefits local states and localities, local regions. It's great for the economy. It's great for all sorts of things. So like science is bipartisan when it comes down to it. It's just stuff like this that's somebody's got an idea and they're trying to, I don't know, they're taking the Tinker Toys away. Paul Disney is saying Congress can fund agencies all it wants. The president can just direct those agencies to do nothing with the funds and he can fire everyone in them. And that is really the problem here, because these agencies are being beheaded. All the people with experience have left. Not all of them, but many of them have left or been removed forcibly. And in doing so, other individuals without experience or with different biases, different reasons for being there are at the helm. And they sometimes are going to do things because they're told to, and they will do what they're told by the president, even though it might be against congressional directions. And that is the issue. Anyway, um, yeah, and I think this is the big question, right? What should be private? What should be public? And I think that is a little bit at the heart of where this struggle lies as people who are very into small government really want to see all of this stuff dismantled and reduced so that, other people can do it and it can be private and profitable. And that on its own is an okay idea, but what we know is that there is a valley of death in investments. There is an issue about kickstarting technologies and being able to make discoveries that can actually lead to them. And instead of it being just, small time, a discovery here in a garage, a discovery there in some billionaire's bunker, um, with the amount of knowledge that can be unearthed is so much greater when there is sustainable, reliable funding. So, anyway, I'm disappointed in what is going on right now, but we'll see where it goes. All of us are having our primaries for elections, and local elections count because our local leaders, our regional representatives, they go to Washington and have a voice for us there. So make sure you're not just waiting for the next presidential election. Our local and regional elections matter so much right now. All right, so that's my science and politics because, chocolate and peanut butter, they go great together. La, 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 la. I'm going to move away from our NSF right now. Enough time spent on that depressing subject. And let's move to some fun things. Are you ready? Let's talk about fluoride. Woohoo! You're probably saying, what? What do you mean? Fluoride? Fun? How is that possible? Well, my friend, let me tell you. So, for years and years, there has been, a fight among some communities for fluoridation of water. Fluoride at certain quantities and in certain ionic compositions is a poison, right? It can be toxic to people. There is a toxicity level at which you don't want to be swallowing a big cup of fluoride. And you definitely don't want any of those fluorine compounds like foof. Those are a little bit dangerous. Boof, boof, woof. Anywho, community water fluoridation came about because people were trying to figure out 100 years ago, so long ago, whether or not bad teeth, what was causing bad teeth, what was causing cavities, right? And in 1901, actually, there was a discovery, they called it the Colorado brown stain, that people's teeth were mottled and brown. And this brown stain, they couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Over the years, they studied it and eventually determined that it was coming from drinking water. And they found that, when people changed their wells, that these kids who had never been drinking from this old well, and all the parents and grandparents and everybody had brown teeth. And when they changed to a new well, the kids didn't develop the mottled teeth. They went, ooh, there must be something in it. Well, move forward a couple of decades and a little bit of technology, and researchers are able to determine that it was fluoride in the water that caused the brown teeth, not the clear teeth, the brown teeth. And so now you're probably like, ew, brown teeth from fluoride? I don't want brown teeth. Brown teeth are bad. Well, at concentrations that are higher than you maybe want, the brown teeth could be bad, but they kept looking and they determined that the kid water this no dental modeling, it had no fluoride. They kept looking at these people and at different wells across the country, and they determined that the fluoride was associated with no cavities. So the kids had pretty white teeth, but they got cavities and they lost their teeth as they got older. However, the adults with all the brown mottled teeth, they didn't lose their teeth as they got older. They didn't have cavities that led to needing to have a tooth pulled or just rotting out of somebody's head. So the brown teeth it became something that was okay to have, but they were able to determine a level at which fluoride was safe and there would be a low risk of getting what they ended up calling cosmetic fluorosis. And so in 1936, they determined that 1.0 parts per million or lower was a great level to avoid this cosmetic fluorosis or Colorado brown teeth. It also, they determined, was able to provide resistance to cavities. And eventually, cities and towns, they started testing this and they started putting a little bit of fluoride in the drinking water. The EPA ended up coming into it and had to manage the water for different people. And so the EPA was kind of involved in this. All of the fluoridation trials came forward and they used 1.0 parts per million to serve as a control near natural fluoride content, and they found they were able to keep cavities from happening. And eventually, from 1901, when nobody's water was fluoridated, to, oh, let's see, where was it? We had 1949, almost 1 million people were in cities where their cities were adding fluoride to the water. They didn't really have anything else that was a problem. So they got dental exams, they were checking things out, go forward until the 70s. We got the EPA there and is dealing with pollution and so they thought, okay, we're going to deal with fluoride as well, but then Congress decided that nah, you're dealing with pollution. Fluoride is not pollution, so the EPA is not going to manage fluoridation at the federal level, and so that left fluoride to be determined by any state, and then eventually also at the city level, that states and cities within them were determining their own level. By 1980, half of the US population was receiving fluoridated tap water. And in 2008, 300 million people in the US. And then by 2020, there were over 77% of people with water systems who had fluoridated water. All through this time, there was a segment of the population who were stuck on health impacts because of the information that spread about fluoride being toxic, that there is a toxicity level and a relationship between toxicity and potentially impacts on development and the brain. Also, people didn't want brown mottled teeth. So, what I'm getting to after this long intro is that in the proceedings of the National Academy of Science this week, there is a study that's published, Municipal Water Fluoridation, Adolescent IQ and Cognition Across the Life Course, Evidence from the Wisconsin Longitudinal Study. So in this study, the researchers compared a significant number of individuals from 5 different cities across their lifespan. So determining when and if they lived in cities that had fluoridation or not. And then they took adolescent IQ measures and to look at cognition later in life, they used an assessment as part of the Wisconsin Longitudinal Study, which was published in 2014. So there was data on adult cognition of these individuals. They correlated that to adolescent IQ and then compared that as well to where they were in their life and what fluoride levels they would have been imbibing. In drinking. So the question is now, What about things like fluoridated toothpaste with fluoride, versus, the dental treatments or mouthwash that add fluoride into your diet, or even going places where natural fluoride levels are higher than the norm. So things like toothpaste and mouthwash and those dental procedures that add fluoride, those were not accounted for. So there's no way of knowing if there was actually excess fluoride ingested during a person's lifespan, but they've done the best job that they can in this particular study. So, what do you think they found, everybody? Basically, they found that over time, these individuals who lived in different places, their cognition and their ability to think, it didn't change significantly. So, people who had naturally fluorinated air water versus fluoridated tap water from a municipal water supply, they did not have significant differences over their lifespan that could be attributed to any fluoride toxicity. The researcher says, of course, this should not be taken as the final word on this matter, but it is it is a longitudinal study. It is looking at a number of individuals across ages and locales, and the evidence is pretty strong that there is no impact of fluoride intake from water on IQ. So, okay, I'm done with that one now. Does anyone have any questions? I don't know if they found the toothpaste cap. I don't know about that one. Yeah. So the researchers are they are hoping that this study will assist in individuals, having new information about fluoride, that it will help different um, regional and metropolitan areas consider fluorinating their water. And one of the big questions, though, is if we consider who is fighting against putting fluoride in water, when we understand the benefits of this element on our health. I mean, who wants to go to the dentist all the time for fillings and cavities? The dentist wants you to go to the dentist all the time. Dental insurance companies want you to go to the dentist all the time. You don't wanna go to the dentist for all this stuff, and imagine if you didn't have to constantly be screened for X-rays for cavities, if you didn't have to do the various treatments to not get cavities. Yeah, maybe you'd have big teeth. Exactly. I have big teeth sometimes, just sometimes. Um, yeah, I know who you're talking about, not big, it's the Big Teeth Consortium. They want you to go to the dentist and spend the money or buy the toothpaste or, do all the things that people do. How much money do you spend? How much time do you put into taking care of your teeth, protecting them from cavities, when potentially um, your teeth wouldn't fall out of your head as much if we just had fluoride in our water? But yeah, we can talk about that more sometime. Let's move on from fluoride to coffee. So, this is another way that you can get brown teeth. I don't think you want brown teeth, but in case you did, this is a way for you to get brown teeth. So, coffee's wonderful. Everybody loves coffee. And Dave Gobi saying, I still have 32 teeth because I'm much wiser. Yes, you are. Here, I'm going to put people's comments up here on the screen. I think that's fun. Um, so, we love coffee. Not everyone loves coffee, but a lot of people. America is very into its coffee culture. It is a global culture at this point in time, not just the tea drinkers in the UK, but there are coffee drinkers everywhere. And everyone wants a really nice cup of coffee. Some people think Dunkin' Donuts is good coffee. I take issue with that. I'm not necessarily someone who needs to go for the special single pour over coffee. I do like a good drip coffee, but at the same time, the roast of the beans and the mix of the beans and the flavor of that cup and how caramely it is and how dark it is and the flavor of the coffee, the richness is what I really get into. And I think there are a lot of people like that as well, including a researcher who has been from the University of Oregon, a chemist named Christopher Hendon, who has been investigating coffee for a couple of decades now. He's been working on developing mathematical models for brewing espresso perfectly every single time. He and his team were able to look at the question of, what goes on with the coffee grounds? You know how you start pouring the water through the coffee grounds and they seem to clump up in a certain way as the water goes. They don't just evenly turn into a slurry and drain out. There is a certain amount of clumping that occurs between the grains as they come from the grinder into the strainer, I guess what you call it, and then into the basket, right? And then add the water to it. There is a differentiation of particles. And so they went, why is there a differentiation of particles? And so several years back, they determined that there is a certain amount of electrostatic charge that gets added to through triboelectricity that gets added to these grains of coffee as they are in the grinder. So as you're grinding them up, you're basically creating static electricity. And the different grains are maybe different sizes, or because you have a mix of beans that are in, if it's not like a single bean type that's in your mix, it it can be differentiating in an odd way, depending on how they were roasted, how they were mixed, all this kind of stuff. Anyway, they found out if you just put a little tiny bit of water in that grinder when you're putting the beans in to be ground, you can get rid of the clumping. But they came back to that question and they're like, what is happening there with the clumping? And so this new study that was just published in Nature Communications, they have basically run current through coffee. They put a voltmeter in the coffee to see what would happen to the coffee. So they took a potentiostat, and this is used to test batteries and fuel cells and to test the electrical potential between the two ends of the current, your positive and your negative ends. So the potentiometer, the potentiostat was used. This is, basically a voltmeter, and they were able to characterize the flavor profile of different kinds of coffee and different pour overs of coffee based on their electrochemical signal. And so it's pretty awesome. Basically, they've determined that you can have these, you can figure out how your coffee is going to taste when it is, if it hits, if you were to do this kind of thing, use a voltmeter with your coffee grounds or your coffee and be able to see how the electrical signal, the current passes through it, you too would be able to reliably determine if you're creating the same flavor profile for a cup of coffee every single time or if there's a difference. So for people who say like me, I get a particular mix of coffee that's already been blended by the coffee maker. If you're getting that particular mix, you could, how sometimes it just doesn't taste quite the same. You could test it and find out whether or not it is passing a different current to find out whether or not it's potentially a different mix than what you've had before. So anyway, I think it's very exciting that we can use electricity to find out how good our cup of coffee is going to be in the morning if you wanted to. Yes. I love Armin dot 311 311 3111. No, there's 4. That's what anyway. Reminds me of the scene in Breaking Bad between Walter and Gale. Very similar. Yeah, I mean, it's chemistry. It really is. And so much of chemistry is having to do with the electrochemical properties of a compound to characterize them in various ways. And in this particular situation, they characterized the flavor profile of the liquid based on the roast color and strength. And that is basically you can go, hey, woo, look at that, minus 0.4 volts. That's my favorite morning cup. Exactly. Potentially. Dum 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 dum. Vada, you're anti-clumping, huh? I'm anti-clumping as well. I wanna get rid of those clumps as much as possible, although I don't know, I'm gonna have to talk with Marshall to find out whether or not he puts any water in the grinder before he grinds the beans. Gonna have to find that. He makes a good cup of coffee, I have to tell you. But I love this story. Anything that can be useful in our everyday lives, and if you too are a chemistry science person and you have a potentiostat on hand, I'd love to find out what you find if you do any experiments on your coffee. I think it'd be really fun. Moving on from shocking our coffee to the shocking news. No, I'm kidding. It's not shocking anymore. This is not shocking. I don't understand it. Researchers at Princeton have created a new device to grow cells, brain cells, neurons, in a 3D cluster that is supported by a microscopic mesh of metal wires and electrodes. So historically, we have cultures of brain cells that are grown on a flat surface in a 2D surface on the bottom of a Petri dish. Or you can have organoids, right? 3D clusters. And I've reported recently that they've started making clusters in like these cool shapes, like donuts and other shapes. But this new fabrication technique that the researchers at Princeton Engineering have done is published in Nature Electronics last week, and the researchers, these students were able to integrate the electrodes and the wires connecting them into the cells in such a way that it created a 3D structure. So it was a mesh-like three-dimensional, not necessarily a cube, but because it was layered in 3 dimensions, it allowed the neurons to grow vertically and side to side between the different layers. And the exciting thing is, this allows three-dimensional correlation and communication from the typical electrical engineered parts and the organic brain parts, so that you have synthetic electronics communicating with neurons in a way that they were able to develop a system that actually talked to the computer and was able to do computing. So they haven't gotten it to play a video game yet, as far as I know. But it is a brain cell that not a brain cell, it is a system that, and this is a very tiny picture of it. This is a system that could be a processor, similar to the company that we've talked about previously, where they're creating basically organic computing parts. This is that kind of system, except instead of being just a bath of cells, this situation is they're making something that is more structurally similar to organic brains, where the neurons are connecting on multiple levels. But in this case, they're able to send signals in from the computer systems that is talking to this, and read the pattern recognition and the pattern generation within it. So this could be, as we could say, oh my gosh, this could be a step for computing. This could be a step for, human computer interfaces. But really, what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to, because of the structural aspects of it, hopefully understand the human brain processes better and also understand the way that things go wrong for treating human disease, as well as the way that things go right, and so inform potential synthetic systems that we might develop. There's lots of neat things here. But I think that, it's a big question about what we want to do with this kind of research. And these students are talking about this as, the other company that we've discussed out of Australia before. Um, they're looking at it as a potential for computing for AI. And if they want to use it as a basis for AI computing, the discussion is that it would be able to decrease the amount of energy that would be necessary. However, that's not to say the amount of water would be any less. We know that organic systems take a lot of water to keep healthy, but computers take a lot of electricity, a lot of energy to keep functioning and to do all the processing. And if we could find a way to make computers more efficient as they process, that would be pretty amazing. Not that I want that for, AI or the future of the Matrix, as Dave Gobi is saying, or even, the future of AGI. I don't necessarily want any of these things, but we are over 8 billion people on the planet, headed toward 10 billion on the planet. And if everybody is computing, if everybody is asking for, process intensive things from our computer systems, from our cloud, from everything, we are going to bake ourselves. We're going to cook ourselves and create a desert planet before we can, say stop. So I think that there's a lot of consideration to how we can make artificial intelligence, which, we shouldn't just call artificial intelligence, that we should call large system processing, that we should call synthetic, not synthetic intelligence, maybe? I don't know. It makes it a little bit different. But anywho, we've got the computers that people are really trying to figure out how to bring the computers and the people together. Ooh, I don't know about this, y'all. Are you excited? Oh, wait. Let's see if I can find. Oh, no, I couldn't get into that paper, actually. Unfortunately, that paper was behind a paywall, so I couldn't actually show you any of the figures from their study. Next time. And this last study here in this little first bit, I don't really have a ton more studies, but I do want to tell. Actually, no, I'm going to take a very quick not break at the moment. I'm going to say, da da da. This is This Week in Science. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. I do appreciate that you're here to talk about science and to think about things outside the box, ask questions, think a little differently. Let's do it together. I think it's great. This Week in Science can be found at TWIS.org. You can click on our Patreon link at our website. Patreon is our community funding platform. And if you join Patreon with This Week in Science, and you join at any level, it's going to help us keep doing the show. But at $10 or more a month, I will thank you by name at the end of the show. And I would love to say your name, so please do that. But if you're not in a position for helping out financially, please just share it with a friend. Get someone else to sign up, get someone else to subscribe. Those kinds of little steps really help in the long run. I really can't do this without you. We can't do it without you. Thank you for your support. All right. And it's not Blair's Animal Corner. which is unfortunate. I do love it when Blair talks about animals, but I'm going to talk about animals for a little bit. Let's start with the fact that we love honeybees. Honeybees who like to travel around looking for flowers, looking for nectar, collecting pollen, flying back to their hive where they work together as a hive to do, amazing things for such a small animal with a like their little tiny ganglia brains are amazing. I'm amazed by all the things that honeybees can do. Anyway, this study out of Louisiana State University was it began as a science fair project, which is really pretty fun, but it turned into something that is a huge question, and it's so much more. So, researchers are at Louisiana State University Ag Center in an extension in the entomology department. They started working with a student for a science fair project, and they were just going to see how bees would react to viruses in their food. Understanding that bees can sense different chemicals, that bees are very sensorily sensitive, they decided to say, hey, here's an easy one. We will have food bottles of regular sugar water, and we'll have bottles of sugar water that have a virus in it. Of course, this is a lab experiment, so it wasn't out in the field, and they weren't just giving a virus to everyone out in the field. That comes later. But the researchers said that it then changed. So from the point of starting this project, they were like, it's going to be easy. We know it's going to turn out that the bees are just going to like regular water. They'll either have no ability to sense the virus laden water, or they are just going to love water. They liked the virus water. Dun, dun, dun. Yes. So the bees, they said, this is crazy. This is something that we don't understand. This is out of the ordinary. So what is happening here? They decided that they needed to move forward with this study. And so they reached out to other individuals at Louisiana State University and they moved on. So also USDA Agricultural Research Service was a group that they worked with on this as well. So the researchers decided to take the study a bit further, and as they took the study further, they tested various, alternate ideas for what the bees were liking or not liking, and in the end, they still showed, after all the studies, they showed that honeybees somehow, they don't know how, honeybees can detect the presence of very specific viruses that they like that are not good for them. Deformed wing virus, black queen cell virus, or chronic bee paralysis virus. These all sound amazing for bees, right? And oh my, did you know that flowers can harbor viruses that hurt bees? They can. There are certain flowers that do. And apparently, the bees like that. So the question is, have they associated the virus with something related to the flowers? Or is it the virus itself? The viruses don't have any aspect of their structure that should be giving off a smell. So there should not be something wafting out of the flowers or out of the water situation that would lead to the bees being able to tell the difference between different food sources. And yet, the bees are, and they are prioritizing, preferring the virus laden food. Is the virus impacting the, the bee brains? So the first bees that find it basically goes zombie on the bees, and those bees go back to the hive and go, this is the one, and then tell everybody else? We don't know. Is it the bees that are sick back at the hive They maybe smell like something and it leads to a learning of preference in the hive itself? They don't think so. They tested viral emissions from the bees that were sick, and there weren't enough protein particles to actually do anything. They tested a conformation where it wasn't actually complete virus, it was just fragments of virus. The bees still liked the virus fragments more than just regular sugar water. What is going on? Why do the bees want to get sick? What is happening? And you would think that it's not something related to the brain because fragments themselves should not end up impacting behavior in that way, and yet they are. So, what is going on? What is happening? Doesn't matter what season, doesn't matter where. Foraging bees prefer virus treated food regardless of season, said the researchers. It is, there are more questions, so that's where this study goes. They want to find out whether or not this is a zombie, like a zombie parasite situation. They need to do more studies. They need to figure out whether or not there is some kind of viral manipulation happening in their hosts, but they don't know of any examples of this having happened previously in bees, so they don't know why that would be happening. And like I said, they still don't know how the bees are even detecting whether or not virus is there. So I think this is a really cool study, and I am really, really quite happy that um, that the science communicator who wrote this story and who works as the director of science communication over there at LSU, Paige Giroux, that she pinged me on LinkedIn to let me know about this story because she said, "This is cool." And nobody really seems to have picked it up in the media. So here we are. I'm telling you about the zombies. Yes, the zombies. How do they work? No one knows, Lon. We don't know how the virus works, that's for sure. Don't have any clue about that. Oh boy, oh boy. So let's move on from bees. I'm going to skip over those stories from Blair, and we're going to move on to sexist city birds. That sounds like fun, right? Those little sexist birds. What are we doing there? What do you mean? What do I mean, sexist birds? What am I talking about? What a terrible thing to say. I know. Researchers just published in People and Nature their study across 5 European countries: great tits, house sparrows, blackbirds, tits, everything. They studied all the birds, in urban areas only, not rural areas, but they wanted to know whether or not birds could tell the difference between men and women, human men and women. So they dressed people up exactly the same, matched them up by height, and if one of them had long hair, they had them hide their hair so it was at least looking the same length on both individuals. So that if the height was the same, they should have a similar gait. If the hair was the same, and the clothing was the same, could the birds tell the difference between men and women? And if so, who do they fear more? The researchers were surprised. So male birds are bolder than female birds. According to their study, they found out that male birds are more likely to stick around longer and to fly away, to flee when any person is closer than female birds would. Female birds are more likely to they're going to get out, which I understand. I would too. So male birds are more likely to do that. However, both male and female birds, I didn't take my bee picture down. Both male and female birds didn't like women. They actually ran away from women sooner, up to a whole meter of space sooner than with men. And there's no explanation for it. The researchers say, well, maybe it has to do with some aspect of gait, the way that people walk that's different, that isn't something that we're thinking about. Or maybe it has to do with body odor. Maybe the birds are smelling something. But this is like across seasons as well. So it's not necessarily related to, springtime when birds have a heightened sense of smell versus the fall when they're not necessarily looking for nesting material that it's going to smell a certain way. So the researchers don't know what's going on. They weren't ready for this result. And they need to go back to the drawing board and find out why. How do the birds tell the difference between human men and human women when those people are about the same height, wearing the same clothes, and they're made up to look very similar? How are the birds telling the difference, and why are they more afraid of women? This is an interesting question. They suggest that perhaps women being in more Paleolithic communities and tribes, that they're maybe more often gatherers as opposed to hunters. And so maybe they more often gathered small birds or the eggs from the nests of small birds than men who were off hunting. Although we have seen studies that Justin has talked about historically that suggest that the men hunter, women forager thing wasn't necessarily as evenly divided as that. But this also doesn't look at rural areas. It's only urban areas. What is going on? Would it be the same in the United States? Would it be the same in Asia? Would it be the same anywhere else? I think it's a fascinating question. Why? What's going on? How do they know? Same as the bees, right? How do they know? We don't know these things. But anyway, yeah, the birds, they know us. They know us. And they don't like women as much, apparently. So, bird watchers out there, it doesn't even matter if you're hiding your hair or trying to act less female to be able to hang out with the birds this spring. They know. Don't worry about it. Just wear what you want to wear. Be who you are. Maybe the birds will like you for who you are. I think that's what we need to aim for. All right, moving on from birds, which I love. We're going to move into a couple of stories. These are my last two stories for the night. It would have been a longer show if Blair had been around, but she's not around tonight, unfortunately. And I do hope she gets better. But these are the nice end of show stories that I think you're really going to enjoy because, like I said at the beginning of the hour, I'm gonna give you a couple of reasons to yawn. And right now, I even say the word and start thinking about the story. and I'm like, and I'm yawning. And it's like, it's a weird in between yawn. Like, it's not a yawn that is really a real yawn, but it is. Like, and I'm clamping. I can feel it. I feel the nervous signal. Do you? I think I feel like I'm sensitive like that. But yawns, they're contagious socially. We don't know exactly why we yawn. All sorts of animals yawn across the animal kingdom. Alligators yawn. So, I mean, it's not even just mammals. We're going to our reptilian ancestry. This is something shared across the vertebral notochord lineage, right? So, what is it that leads us to yawn? A new study out of UNSW, so Sydney University. This research is these researchers from UNSW Sydney have just published their work on a new idea that they have using real-time MRI scans at the base of the brain, looking at the cerebrospinal fluid versus the venous blood that's leaving the skull. So the cerebrospinal fluid, it kind of sits in the space, right, between it bathes the brain, and it also goes down your spinal column, and it has a constant pressure, and we know that when we do a spinal tap, the big problem is it can leak out, and so, you wanna plug the spinal tap or any spinal, hole so that the spinal fluid does not leak out because it leaks out, and then you get headaches, and it can be very dangerous for people, but it is pressure regulated. And our venous blood, we have blood that is pumped in through the arteries, through the power of the heart, gets in, pump up, goes through the capillaries, ends up leaving on the venous side. And that is the same thing pumped out, pumped out, pumped out, pumped out, pumped out. We also know that our body's movements can move things around and change things. So when you yawn, are you impacting the way that the cerebral spinal fluid is moving into or out of the brain? One of the ideas that people have had historically about cerebrospinal fluid is that it is part of removing lymph, removing metabolites, garbage from the brain. And so the good cerebrospinal fluid is there, but it's also taking all the bad stuff out. They had people in their real-time fMRI machine, and they were looking at the cerebrospinal fluid coming out of the spinal column and the venous return from the skull. They had people open their mouths. They had people pretend to yawn, and they used yawning videos to get people to yawn. And what they found is that in normal breathing, what happens when you're just breathing and not doing anything weird, the venous blood is coming out and the cerebral spinal fluid moves the opposite direction. It drains, it goes up into the body. So normal breathing, venous blood removes the carbon dioxide rich, low oxygen blood from the skull and takes it back to the heart. The cerebrospinal fluid, though, when you take a breath, goes into the brain, similar to arterial blood. When you yawn, it all goes out. Venous blood and cerebrospinal fluid go out of the brain at the same time when you yawn. And so the researchers think yawning is a mechanism to take garbage, to take that stuff from metabolism out of your brain and get it down into the body. Don't know if they're right, but they did see it happen. And when people pretended to yawn, it was still just like regular breathing, opposite directions. Cerebrospinal fluid in, venous blood out. Regular breathing, cerebrospinal fluid in, venous blood out. A big yawn. A big yawn. Cerebrospinal fluid out, venous blood out. So maybe there's something to it. Maybe there's something to yawning that helps refresh your brain. New evidence. It's very exciting. We don't know. There could be something related to the tongue when you yawn. There could be something that we don't even understand what is happening mechanistically there. So they're going to be looking at all of this. They found everybody yawns a different way. So there's some consistencies and some differences, and so they have a lot to dig into with a good yawn. If anybody wants to yawn again, go right ahead right now. It's not that late yet here, but it's late enough for me to tell you about your melatonin that maybe you're thinking about starting to take sometime soon as you get ready for bed. So melatonin is a compound that is actually it's a hormone activator in our bodies. It acts in our body systems to affect our circadian clocks. We take it because it helps to lead to sleep, right? It helps to regulate sleep. And so this new paper published in Current Biology, the researchers, um, these researchers from Caltech, they were trying to figure out exactly what's going on with the melatonin in getting us to fall asleep, not in how it's setting our circadian rhythm or helping us have a regular rhythm but how does it help us to get to sleep, right? How does that even work? And they use zebrafish. This is not people, but they are diurnal, right? So they are awake during the day and sleep at night. And they could also genetically modify them and impact certain aspects of their metabolism, like melatonin, very easily. So the researchers, they know that melatonin works in these zebrafish and that they have genes and proteins and all of the stuff that we've got in our system, just a lot smaller and a little bit more basic. But they wanted to know exactly how it works. So one of the graduate students in the lab got mutant zebrafish that lacked melatonin receptors. And they found that those zebrafish did not have regular circadian sleep. They were not able to respond to light dark patterns. They didn't sleep regularly. They had really disrupted patterns. So, getting rid of the ability for melatonin to connect to the neurons in the brain, it disrupted all sorts of stuff. And so then they're like, what part of the brain does that work in? And they determined these receptors where they were breaking, where he had broken them, is an area called the optic tectum. And this is also a part of the brain. So our optic nerve comes in, it comes into the optic tectum, and that's one of the first areas leading into the visual system. And this area of the brain is highly, it manages stimulus, visual stimulus. So they got the zebrafish with and without the ability to bind their cells to melatonin. And then they gave them different stimuli of light. They also found that the mutant zebrafish were not able to produce melatonin in the regular way. Not just the receptor was broken, they weren't producing melatonin in the right way. And they found that the flickering of the lights, they didn't respond to them in a different way from day to night. Normal zebrafish, however, they were producing melatonin, and when the the lights were flickering in the daytime, the fish were like, "Ah, predator," and they wanted to swim away and get out of there. But when the lights were flickered at night when the melatonin had been released and they had their normal sleep cycles, the fish were not responsive or they were less responsive to those lights. And so what they are positing is that melatonin, and this is the title of the paper, melatonin promotes sleep by suppressing responses to visual stimuli through these melatonin receptors. And so this is one of the first studies that has found this link to how melatonin manages our sensitivity to visual stimuli. And so, we can take melatonin and then stay up. It's fine. But if you do want to take melatonin and go to sleep, what it's going to do is you turn your lights off and you start doing all the things, it's going to limit your reactions to things. You probably should not take melatonin if you want to keep gaming late at night. It's probably going to slow down your reaction time because you're not going to react as much to some of those visual stimuli. So, that for you late night gamers is my advice. And you usually need to take melatonin about 2 hours before you want to go to bed for it to have a big impact. So, on that, are we ready for bed, everybody? Is it time to take our melatonin and yawn? Maybe? Thank you for being here. I don't have any more stories tonight, unfortunately, but it was wonderful to spend time with you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for enjoying the science. If you have any questions, of course, you know where to find me in the future. It is time for me to say thank you to all of you for caring about science and the world and how science impacts our world, how we impact science. Thank you for listening. And I do hope that you enjoyed this one-man show. Or I guess one crude show. Was it that crude? I don't know. Thank you. Shout outs, Fada. Thank you for your help with social media and show notes. Gord, Arnlor, everyone in the chat room. Thank you for all your help keeping the chat room a wonderful place to be and for being here during the show while we're live. I really appreciate that. Identity 4, thank you for recording the show. And Rachel, thank you for editing. I really appreciate all the work and the time that all of you spend with me and with these scientific ideas. I would like now to thank our generous Patreon sponsors. Thank you to Aaron Anathema, Adam Mishkan, Alan Viola, Ali Colfin, Andrew Swanson, Artem, Arthur Kepler, Bob Calder, Bob Coles, Brendan Minish, Brian Carrington, Chris Wozniak, Christopher Dreyer, Christopher Rapp, and Craig Landon, Craig Potts, Daryl Myshak, Dave Wilkinson, David E. Youngblood, Don Mundis, Eoin Mundell, Eric Knapp, Flying Out for Us 104, G. Burton Lattimore, Greg Briggs, Jack, Jason Olds, John Atwood, John McKee, John Ratnaswamy, Johnny Gridley, Ken Hayes, Kent Northout, Ken Parachan, Kevin Reardon, Kurt Larson, Lon Makes, Lauren Gifford, Mary Gertz, Marjorie, Mark Hassenflow, Mark Jenkins, Noodles, Patrick Pecoraro, Paul D. Disney, Paul Ronovich, Philip Shane, Pierre Velazar, Richard Badge, Robert Norland, Robert Farley, Rodney Lewis, Rudy Garcia, Remy Day, Sean Clarence Lamb, Shubu, Stephen Alberon, Steve Leisman, Sue Doster, Teresa Smith, Tony Steele, and Vigard Shefstad. Thank you for all of your support on Patreon. And if any of you are interested in supporting us on Patreon, head over to twist.org, click on that Patreon link, and join the community. I just joined the new aspect of the app. They've created kind of a social media feed within Patreon, which is kind of neat. And so I'm maybe playing with that a little bit in the near future. I don't know. I do a little bit better with the social media than like the regular posting of things in the blog style format. But regardless, I do hope that I see you there and that we have a little back and forth. I think that would be fun. And for anyone, I do appreciate all the support on Patreon or through PayPal or however it is. It really is wonderful that you appreciate the show that much. Next week, hopefully Blair will be back and we will be live again on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Pacific time, broadcasting live from our Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook channels. If you want to listen to us a podcast, just search for This Week in Science wherever podcasts are found. If you enjoyed the show, get your friends to subscribe too. Come on, you can do it. For more information on anything you've heard here today, show notes and links to stories will be available on our website, twist.org. You can also sign up for our newsletter. And I have like a new idea for the newsletter, which I've started, and I think it's kind of fun. So I don't know. It might be a surprise for everybody. I hope you like PDFs. Or I hope you like maybe real paper. I don't know. I might be making a real paper thing that doesn't rely on the internet. Is that weird? I don't know. Check your local cafes in the Pacific Northwest. Anyway, we love... Oh, no, I did. Yes, we love your feedback. I do love your feedback. If there's a topic you would like us to cover or address or a suggestion for an interview, please let us know on one of our social media accounts at Twist Science. I'm at Dr. Kiki or the Dr. Kiki. And you can also send us an email if that's what you want to do. Make sure you put Twist in the subject line so that your email does not get spam filtered into... the National Science Board. Bah, humbug. And anyway, I think that's it. So we do look forward to discussing science with you again next week. I do, very much so. And if you've learned anything from the show, please remember it's all in your head.
This week in science. This week in science. This week in science. This week in science, it's the end of the world. So I'm setting up shop, got my banner unfurled. It says the scientist is in, I'm gonna sell my advice. Show them how to stop the robots with a simple device. I'll reverse global warming with a wave of my hand. And all it'll cost you is a couple of grand. 'Cause this week's science is coming your way. So everybody listen to what I say. I use the scientific method for all that it's worth. And I'll broadcast my opinion all over the earth. 'Cause it's this week in science. This week in science. This week in science. 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 This week in 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 science.